Welcome everyone, it's Neil here from 3D Tutor, back today with another complete scene build. And this time we'll be creating an amazing alien world environment, complete with a stylized tower and an animated floating crystal. In this video, we'll go through everything. That includes the complete build, the animation, fog, stars, planets, basically anything you see here. Which, as every scene we create, comes with its own complete download pack, so you can either create this scene yourself, or any future scenes you might want to create in the future. This pack contains everything you see in the tower, except the mountains, which we'll be creating for a future pack. And not forgetting the floating crystal, which comes with its own rig and animations. Everything is named and ready to go. Oh, and also there's an Unreal Engine 5 texture pack as well. So whether you want to use Blender or Unreal Engine, the choice is up to you. And of course you can use all of these models in the new Blender 3 Asset Manager. Links to the Gumroad are down below. And of course it's free to all of our Patreon members, along with over 250 hours of Blender courses. So be sure to check those out. And every Monday, right here on our YouTube channel, you'll find a tutorial covering some of the techniques in depth that you'll find in our complete scene builds. On Tuesday next week, as always, we have another exciting build, which will be a Wizard's Turntable. And here's a sneak peek, so be sure not to miss that one. As always, if you want to get your ideas featured in one of our scenes, then drop your comments down below, and we've had some amazing ideas so far, and at least 2 of them are in the works. Finally, all the techniques you see here in these scene builds are covered in our massive library of over 20 courses and 200,000 downloads, so be sure to check those out. But enough of all that, what you're here for is to see how we put this scene together. So let's get started on our stylized Crystal Tower environment scene. Welcome everyone to the Greybox and modelling part of the floating crystal tower. You can see the first thing there is I brought in a human reference just to get some scale. And what I'm actually doing first is I'm going to actually create the Greybox, a really rough Greybox this will be, just to give me an idea of proportions and where everything's going to go. So at the moment I'm using pretty simple modelling techniques, and you can see here that I'm going to build some stairs, because as I'm working along on my Greybox I'm actually working out how I'm actually going to do something. So with the stairs, they can be tricky, but once you've actually got it nailed down, they are actually very easy. So what I did is I tried there, first of all, to base it around a actual empty, and I think that's the way I'm going to go for it. So basically I brought it up and I found I had 4 of them, so I'm just going to delete one of those out of the way because I only actually want 1 of them. I was just testing to see actually how it looked. Does it look better with 4 or just with 1? And in the end I just decided to go with 1. So now you can see what I'm doing is bringing it down, bisecting that across just to cut the bottom off that over, and then just moving it into place. At the moment I'm not really too concerned with how everything looks. It's more just to get the dimensions right and where everything's going to go. You can see I did play around with the steps, thinking would it be cool if we had like a diamond shape in the middle, then I'm just arraying them out. In the end I decided not to go with this actually. I thought it looked better just as stone slabs, but for now, as the Greybox is, I thought okay, we'll give that a try and then just make it a bit rough and ready like so. And now I'm basically making the pillars, and all I'm making these pillars for is just to see how it's all going to come together, how it's going to look with the chains and things like that attached to the actual crystal. I did beforehand have a fairly good idea in mind what I was actually going to do here. You can see here I'm creating the actual chain links. I just use the curves to actually create those. And they're really simple to create, and I can move them into place really easily once I've actually got them there. Again, because it's a Greybox, I'm not really taking time to position them properly or anything like that. I'm just getting a set out already for when I actually come to do the major part of the modelling. You can see here I'm actually using the Boolean tool to actually Boolean that, and it's not actually working out too well. So what I'll do is I just delete it, put it in place, and I'm just going to leave it for that for now. If I was doing a Greybox for someone else and giving it to someone else, I'd probably just do a plane there instead and let them decide what sort of floor they're going to do and things like that. Here I'm just making a basic altar. Really basic. In the main build I actually come and really develop that idea a lot more, but I knew I wanted a curved top on it. So now I'm actually starting on the main model. Now I've got a basic Greybox, and what I'm doing is I'm actually blocking this cylinder out. I'm going to use this as kind of some grease blocks or big stones that I'm actually going to then bevel in place. So you can see here, just blocking it all out. And then I'm splitting them up, solidifying it, and then beveling it off. And there you can see, it makes a really, really nice result actually. And then what you can do is you can also randomize it as well, like you saw I did a little bit of that there, just to bring it out a little bit. And it's a really easy way to make stylized blocks. Now I'm just putting the top on. And again, I'm going to split those off using actual mark seams, because I know then I can grab it with face select on each one as you saw there, press Y, and then I'm just split them off. And I'm just bringing those in, and now you can see they're all split, and I just need to fill in the faces and make them actually a solid piece of mesh. Now I did try to use the mesh fill holes here, but it didn't actually work, so I had to just go in, press Alt F and fill those in. Again, beveled those off and you can see it looks really nice. Now I'm just going to pull that up with a little bit of proportional editing, just to get a kind of slope on there. And now I'm going to actually come in and create that cup, as you can see on the top, that's going to hold the actual crystal in place, using a lot of proportional editing, extrusion, and just playing around with the actual shape on this, just to get it into a nice stylized shape. Okay, so now I'm going to bring over the crystal. You can see that I'm resetting all the transforms, bringing it up, and now what I want to do is I've got the right scaling, so what I'm going to do now is take it into Zbrush. Wouldn't go through to start with, I don't think I sent it out properly, and you can see there where I actually didn't fill in those faces correctly, so now I have. Finally it's in Zbrush now. I'm going to actually divide it up, Dynamesh it, and now I'm just going to sculpt on it with the clay build up. And now what I'm doing is I'm cutting it away with the trim brush, which is Control Shift and just drag across, and then you can actually cut it away like so, just to get that rough hewn shape. And now you can see I'm just going in with trim dynamic and flattening all those edges off, and you can see how easy that was to do. It took probably 10 minutes or something, and now I'm doing is I'm just masking out these actual grooves that I'm going to have for my crystal. And then what I'm doing is I'm going over to my mask and making sure that they're really solid, and then I'm just going to use the inflate, bring it down a touch, and there you go, and now just polish it off. And there you go, I'm just trying to sharpen them, just sharpen up that a little bit more. In fact, I don't think I actually sharpened it. I actually think I blurred it a little bit because I thought it looked better. And now I'm doing is I'm just going to decimate it now. It's very high on the polygon count. I don't want it too low actually, because I'm going to use this as a high poly. I'm going to bake it against my low poly. So now I'm just finishing it off now. Just making sure I'm happy with it. And at the moment you can see it's at 190,000 polygons. But when we take this through to Blender, because it's coming from Zbrush, it's probably going to be more like 4,000. You can see there though that the low poly is around 6,500 polygons. I used a quick Z remesher on it, and I'm just pulling it out a little bit. And I'm just actually wondering if that's going to be good enough. So what I do is I'd actually delete it, I duplicate it again, I decimate it down, and it comes out a lot better, as you can see. So there's my high I've exported out, exporting out my low, and there we go, we've got them both. Now just bring in the low now. And we can see when I bring this in, it's very low on the polygon count. It's like 600 polygons or something, so I managed to get it down pretty low. Alright, so now we build in the actual base, well the circular part of the base, and now the pillars. Now with the pillars I did want them to be rounded, but I did start off with a cube, because basically you can just Control B, use your bevel, and basically bring it in. And now I'm doing is I'm just checking how I actually want these to appear, because I know I'm going to need 4 of them. So what I'm doing is I'm only doing the work which I can then transfer to the others. I know that pulling them up like this, I wanted them all to be different. So I'm just checking out now how I can actually do that, and then I'll go back and make 4 of them and then pull them up in a random way and then pull them out. So you can see here, look, I've actually rotated them around as well to get them in the right position. Like so, I'm bringing them all up, and now I want to pull them all out together. So I tried pulling them all out together, it didn't actually work with proportion editing, so what I did was I copied the actual scale and then just pasted that in. So now they're all basically the same. Put them all in the same position, and now I can use the center part of this model to actually rotate them around like so. And again, I'm having a little bit of problem moving them out, so what I did is I just copied the actual angle that I'm pulling them out, pasted it in, and there you go. You can see now they're all at exactly the same angle. So now I'm starting to work on outwards a little bit, trying to get this actual top part of the tower all in place. And now I'm just pulling that out and actually making this into a crystal. I'm thinking to do the crystals before the rest of it, just so I have an idea of what it's all going to actually look like. So I'm just extruding those down, deleting them out of the way because those faces, no one's ever going to see them. And now we're back into ZBrush. I always bring in your cylinder and then I bring in the crystals, and what that does is it makes sure that I don't delete that actual crystal that I've already created. And now again you can see I've dynameshed these just to give me some polygons to work with, and I'm just going to do exactly the same technique. So it's clay build up, trim curve, and then trim dynamic, just to bring this crystal down and make it look that hewn kind of shape. And you can see as well that, you know, bouncing between Blender and ZBrush actually is really quick. And you can get results, you know, within sort of 10-20 minutes or something like that when you're trying to make crystals. It would take, I think it would take a lot longer actually in Blender, but you could actually do this complete process in Blender anyway. So pretty much the same technique with the crystals. I did decide rather than just duplicating them to actually do them all separately because it was so quick to do them. So might as well have them all looking really different. And again, what I'm going to do is once I've actually done these, I'm going to use this high poly mesh. I'm going to decimate it down a little bit just to make it workable, because you don't want to send through, you know, 2 million polygons through to Substance Painter or anything like that, because it does take a lot of time. So I tend to decimate it down before it starts to actually look triangulate or anything like that, and then I know that I can use that as the high poly. So once I've got this high poly, I'll actually make a duplicate of it. I will then either Z-remesh it or just straight off decimate it down, you know, to something workable like 600 or 700 polygons or something like that. And normally that's all you need to do. There are some cases where you need to scale it up a little bit just to make sure the bake is, you know, a lot better than it would be. So now you can see I'm just decimating them down, and there's my low poly now that I've got, and we actually got really good bakes off this. So once I've done that, I'm going to send it through then to Blender. I'm going to smooth them off. You can see here I'm just putting the high and low, and the reason I'm putting the dash high like that and the dash low is because in Substance Painter that's how it actually reads the file. So I will read the high and the low together and put them together because they're called the same name, but dash high and dash low, and also it's a lowercase as well, so just remember that if you're going to do it. Alright, so now I'm doing is I'm actually working on the actual stone floor, and what I'm going to do is I've got my boolean actually there. I created a cylinder, extruded it out, alt S to bring it out, and there you go, you can see we've got our floor. So now you can see I'm pulling them out, beveling them off. I'm not actually having that diamond shape in there this time. You could put the diamond shape in there by using another boolean, I guess, or something like that, but actually I was happier how this came out like this. It looked much better. Alright, so now we're creating the bottom of the pillars, and this is just simple stuff, what we've already done. You can see the center part, I'm just doing the same thing really, marking the seams, splitting them off, making them smaller, filling in the holes, and then beveling it off. You can see it's a really simple process that gives you really good results, especially for stylized work. If I was doing something realistic, I probably would take through these parts into ZBrush and really roughen up the edges and things like that. Alright, so this part here, I'm actually thinking I'm going to make a stone wall to go around this bottom part. I did change this in the end, so basically I just made one block, used array, and then what I did was I used the simple curve to actually bend it around there, and then again I used the randomize just to randomize those up. It's actually called simple deform, not simple curve. So now actually making the chains, and again I'm going to use the Bezier curves to actually create these, and I'm going to make it actually array along this actual curve that I've actually put in there as well. So not only are the chain links made out of curves, but also it's following a curve along, so just makes it really easy. Once I've got them in place, you can see how easy it is then to bend them to look a little bit different from each other. I don't want them all the same. And we're literally just bending that curve and the chain's bending with them. It's just a really, really easy process. If you want more bends in it, just subdivide that actual curve, and then you'll be able to bend it even more. So now I'm just getting them in place, making sure I'm happy with them, and then what I'm going to do is I'm going to delete those curves out of the way, come in, get rid of any links that I don't actually need, that we won't be able to see, because obviously they cost a lot in Polygon, so you might as well delete them off. Alright, so now top view, making sure everything's straight, making sure they're all going into that center crystal perfectly. And now what I'm doing is I'm actually thinking about my steps now. So I made a cylinder, I extrude it in, and then it gives you, and then basically what you do is you press Ctrl I, and what that does is it selects every other one that apart from the one you've got selected, so then you just delete them out of the way. It's a really quick way of actually doing it. So now you can see I'm using an empty and an array modifier, spin the empty round, and there you go, you can see you've got your curves. We do actually have a tutorial on this. I'll put it up in the top right hand side so you'll be able to see exactly what we do. Now I did make a mistake here. I went straight into creating the steps. What I should have done is create the base first before creating those steps, because it's making it much harder work for me in the long run. You can see here how I'm making that outside of the actual steps, but you can see I'm having a lot of trouble actually putting it together, and when I do eventually put this together, you'll see that it's really blocky and I can't actually work with it. I do try working with it, but in the end, actually a bit later on, I actually have to go in and actually recreate these steps again. It was easy enough because obviously I've created these steps 3 times now, so it wasn't a problem, but now you can see I'm trying to grab it, randomize every other one just to make them a little bit different from each other. I'm just trying to select them all, trying to find a way, but it didn't work in the end. So what I did is I just, selected them in that way, pulled them down, and then I'm just going to use the bisect tool just to cut that away. But you can see just how blocky that was. Now I did think initially I can take them through to Zbrush, I can dynamesh it, and then they'll turn out okay. But in the end, I didn't actually do that. So. Okay, so here we go. Now we've got the bottom part of the tower. I thought I'll make a start here just to see how it's all going to come together, because obviously it's going to be a modular pack, so I need to make sure that the rest of the tower actually looks the same as the top part of it. You must be careful when you're building things like this, like the top part and the bottom part, they don't look completely different from each other, so make sure that there's consistency right through your build. So it's a good idea once you've built some part of it, before carrying on with it, try and get that same look in the next part of your build. So you can see here, I'm making a kind of platform. I'm also telling a story with this, because how did they get to that platform? So I think it's a good idea whenever we're building things like this, like we really try and tell a story. So you can see there, did somebody float there? Did a vehicle come there? And that's the storytelling we're trying to actually do as artists. So I thought, well, these stone slabs, they're not going to support themselves on there. I mean, there's a floating crystal, but the other stone blocks, they're not actually floating. So basically I'm trying to actually strengthen this out and making sure it's actually structurally accurate as well. And you must take that into consideration when you're doing your own builds. Make sure that things actually, they would be held up properly. Like here, those stone blocks are sat on that. If they weren't sat on that now, they'd just be hanging there, and it wouldn't actually probably look right because there's too much weight on there. So now I'm just doing a quick test of lighting just to see how it's all coming together, and then also turn on cavities in the viewport shading. Now what I'm doing is I'm mirroring it, and then I'm spinning them round so that they're even all the way around. Alright, so now going back, I think back to my steps to see, okay, so how are we going to do this? So I'll bring in a cylinder, I'm thinking, can I actually cut it away all down there? And that's probably going to make it really hard work, so I'm not going to do it that way. So then I'm going to pull these down and use the bottom of my steps to try and get that part there. And in the end, I did away with all those. So what I did was, I've got my steps again, I recreated them again, and this time, instead of just doing the steps, I actually did the bottom as well. So you'll see I think, oh, I'll split them up. No, I need to actually, before I do that, grab that plane, pull it down, and then I can use that for the bottom part of the underneath of the steps. And there you go, you can see now it's starting to actually come together. And that was, yeah, it was a lot of mistakes actually in the steps, but I did learn a lot from actually doing those. So now I'm going to cut it away. Again with the bisect tool, just trying to get it all in the right size. But you can see that it's still really, really blocky, and that's not something I was happy with. So I'm thinking now in my head as I'm actually building through this is how I'm actually going to get rid of all those blocks. So just focus on the steps though, get those right, cut it away, and now we can send that through to Zbrush. Dynamesh it. There you can see I had to change the display because I didn't fix the normals before sending it in. So I just changed the display because I knew this would be quick. And I'm thinking, that's still pretty blocky. It's a lot of polygons. I'm not going to be able to get that down. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to send it out and I'm going to re-topologize it. So I'm going to go into Topogun. It's a piece of software that I absolutely love for any kind of re-topologizing. You can re-topologize in all software, but this is the one I love, so this is the one I always use. I just find it really jibes with me. The buttons are really easy, things like that. So there you go, you can see I'm just re-topologizing those steps, and you can see how low the polygon count is now. And then once we get to the top, I think, okay then, so I'll actually fill that part in. But in the end I actually thought, you know what, it's not actually the best idea to fill that in. And in the end I might have been right or wrong, because we still end up with some blockiness. So as you can see now, I'm going down there because I'm thinking, right, I can just extrude that part down. And you'll see when it comes in. There you go, I'm extruding those down now. As you can see, all those lines, just pull them down like so. But you can see that even though I've done that, it does end up with some blockiness on the only top parts, which actually I wasn't too concerned with, because I knew that I can't just leave stone steps really overhanging like that. It doesn't really look right. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to put some kind of curb on there or something like that. And actually this curb turned out really nice, because I could actually pull it down and make a really, really nice shape out of it. So again, steps ending in the middle of nowhere is probably never a good idea. So just in case, when you create your own steps, just make sure you put some kind of barrier there or something like that, and just make it ornate as well, so it really looks nice, as you can see. Alright, so now what we're doing is we're going, I think, yes, we're working on the windows now. So make a start on the windows. I wanted it to fit the scene, so I'm just trying to make it a little bit different. Again, I'm going to use the same thing where I'm going to solidify, then split up all these blocks, as you can see there, make them smaller, bevel them off, pull them all together. Great way to make stonework. And now I need to do is I need to pull it in place, but I know that that piece that's on its own, I'm going to use that to actually boolean these holes into place. So you can see now I'm just pulling it round, and now boolean them off and delete them, and we should be left with holes in place, as you can see there. Did have a few problems booleaning them, so I think I used difference, and then I'm extruding them in on normal. Just make sure it's set to normal, then you can pull them in all to the center, and now pull in those windows round. And there you go. Now I'm tending to do is I'm going through everything now, making sure that everything is beveled off, nice and smooth, things like that. So we don't want hard edges or anything like that. We need to put in sharps where they need to go. And there you go, I'm just splitting that off as well, because I know that this is going to be a modular pack as well, in case we want to build a lot of towers and things like that, or in case in the future we want to actually add to this to make, a city kind of coming out of the clouds and things like that. Then if we've already got this part, it's very easy then just to add to this, as long as everything's in a kind of modular pack or something like that. So at the moment I think we created 4 or 5 pillars or something, and about 4 or 5 tiers as well, so we can easily create a massive tower if we wanted to. And then all you could do is you could probably create some smaller kind of assets that will kind of stick on the side of the tower and make it look really, really different. It's a great way if you're building cities and things like that. to save yourself a lot of work rather than building every single building over and over again. Always try and get in the habit of working with modular packs. And this modular pack, as you've seen, is available to download, so just check out the links and you'll see it there. Now I'm just making the rings and trying to make it all go together. I tend to bounce between things as well, so now I'm going back to the altar. I should have used a reference on this altar. Really, I usually do that, but on this one occasion I just thought, you know, I'm just going to see where my imagination takes me, and that's exactly what I did. And you can see there, that is the actual shape that I came up with. So you can see it's a very different actual shape, and I'm just making it bigger because it did look, you know, a little bit dinky in comparison to the rest of the build. So, and now I'm just creating some stylized simple candles. Probably would have took a bit more time if I had it with the candles. I would have took them into Zbrush, and it would have been just as easy to make the, you know, the sides of them and things like that. But actually I thought the way I did it, subdivision surface, some cubes, extrude them out a little bit, rotate them around, it actually worked out quite nicely in the end. So, but if I did it in Zbrush, you know, I'd have to do a high and low probably, because you wouldn't get that kind of definition there. So maybe it was better doing it this way. In the modular pack, actually, I've just put a light on top of those with an emission, so the candles are actually lit. So, alright, so now I'm just creating the bottom bit, and I know the bottom bit is going to be the main pot that we're going to use to actually expand it out this tower and bring it down. So that's why I'm taking my time, making sure that all fits together so that we can make this tower as high as possible. And then what you do is you use the kind of straight pieces to come, and then you can just, you know, continue that tower down and down, as you can see there. So that's exactly what I'm doing. Alright, so now I'm doing is I'm just actually getting the windows. I only need one of them because I'm just going to UV unwrap one of the windows. I'm splitting everything off now to just make sure I'm only UV unwrapping the things that I need to. I don't want to UV unwrap, you know, 100 different pillars and have to paint them all. And the reason for that is not because it takes a long time to paint 100 pillars. It's more a case of it's a UV space. It's very, very expensive UV space. So if you can save yourself UV space by you know, using the same asset over and over again, it's a huge save on computer power and things like that. So that's why I'm actually doing that. Some things you can't get away with. I mean, you don't want the whole tower just looking exactly the same. You need some differences there. But if you can, try and save on UV space. Now you can see what I'm doing. I'm just splitting everything off, making sure everything's beveled, sharpening the edges up, and just basically making sure it's all ready to actually be UV unwrapped. Okay, so at this point I'm thinking, okay, what else do I need in here? I'm adding the final touches now. And again, just making sure everything is set, making sure all the transformations and orientations are correct, making sure it's all split off, making sure all the holes are filled in, because you don't want a modular part where there's gaps in there and things like that. It's just not going to go together very well. And here we are, back onto the UV now, just making sure everything unwraps. And what I'm doing here is actually, I'm making sure the things that I want put together all have the same material on them, because when we send these through to Substance Painter works by bringing in the materials, so all of the assets with the same material will be one asset in Substance Painter. So you can work on like 5 different materials and it could be 100 different assets. So basically now what I'm doing is I'm using Blender's automatic unwrap to unwrap all these, because again, when you send these through to Substance Painter, it's really easy actually to use projection painting, or tri-planar projection it's actually called, to actually paint onto our meshes. You can see there I missed a bevel, so I just go in and actually fix that. I'm thinking, should I get rid of the inside of all these? I go first of all and I think, right, this is the easiest way, using the circle select, delete all those off, and it's going to save me a lot of UV space. Again, I did the same thing with the steps, just delete the back of them, no one's ever going to see those, and you can see now how much difference that makes on that UV map. Now I'm just trying to get this altar right because it looked a bit soft, so I want to harden up some of those edges. And basically these are just the last checks actually before we actually send this through to Substance Painter to be painted. And you can see how quickly it comes from a Greybox to the main model, and then unwrapped, and then sent through to Substance Painter. And you really get an idea how it's actually going to work within a studio and things like that. Alright, so that brings us to the end of the Greybox and modeling section. I hope you enjoyed that, and I'll see you on the next one. Welcome everyone to the crystal animation chain part, and you can see here what I'm doing first of all is I'm splitting all my actual chains up, then I'm making one large bone. I'm actually going to subdivide it and then just bring all those bones down and put them into place. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to duplicate that round. I'm keeping it as the same actual armature or skeleton just to make it easier on myself. We actually have a tutorial on creating this actual rig on chains, making your chains move in this way. I'll put it up on the top right hand side. Alright, so what I'm trying to do now is get them all to be the same actual, making sure they fit the chain well, and then what I'm doing is I'm extruding out that last bone, and that is going to be my IK. As you can see there, I'm renaming them all to IK, and then what I'm doing is I'm actually attaching that bone that's next to the IK to the IK, and then you can see when I pull up that IK, it all moves together in a realistic way. And now what I want to do is I want to make an actual center bone, because if you don't do that, when you try and move these bones attached to the IK, they kind of flick around, and you don't actually want that. So now you can see, if I bring in a center bone and I parent them up to that center bone and then I try and move them, you will see how much smoother this actual chain moves, and that's exactly, there you go, you can see now it's moving much smoother and not flicking around or anything like that. Now once I've done all that, what I want to do of course is I want to weight this all to my chain and crystals, and that's what I'm actually going to do next. I did them as one actual skeleton because when you start joining skeletons together or armatures together, it creates a lot of problems. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to check the weights, because you can see there that the only bone I want with weight on that center crystal is that center bone. The rest of them, all the chain links, I'm just removing now 100% of the weight just to make sure it's only attached to that center bone, that crystal. And now what I'm doing is I've got it now, so what I want to do is I want to actually animate this crystal going up and down, and less is better on something like this. You want it to be very subtle, you don't want it bouncing around all over the place and things like that. So you can see it's very subtle, there's not a lot of keys, animation keys in at all. And all I'm doing is I'm just inserting keys, and finally I change the interpolation, I think, to Bezier on this, just to make it a nice smooth transition. And you can see there, it was a very quick process, and you see how easily it is to do that. Alright everyone, so that's the animation part done. I hope you enjoyed it, and I'll see you on the next one.
Now, in order to start out my texturing process, I wanted to firstly check out the entire asset within Blender file. So I went ahead and opened it up and just checked out all the normals as well as the texture maps, and just made sure that everything is set out properly for my Substance Painter texturing process to begin. So I noticed that there are a couple of normal maps that are facing the other way, so I know that they're going to cause some issues when we're baking out our texture maps for ambient occlusion as well as for normal map detail. So I just went ahead and quickly fixed them by inverting them and flipping them around. Then afterwards I went ahead and saved the asset out and continued on to go onto the Substance Painter and import an asset as an FBX file. So once I went ahead and did that, I needed to bake out the texture maps, which was quite a fast thing to do since I've only used 2048 texture maps. So once I was rendering everything out, I was rendering out everything including like thickness maps and ID maps. Even though I'm not exactly using them in the future for texturing process, I still wanted to have like curvature and ambient occlusion maps obviously, but things like ID map, they're really fast to bake out, so I wasn't even worried about picking them all. So then, once I started to texture out the concrete for the castle, I went ahead and added a base, kind of a concrete that you can find within Adobe Painter, and I just made use out of it. I made sure I project the texture just to get, just to avoid the kind of a seams that you'd get otherwise. And then afterwards, I added a curvature map just to highlight those edges of this tower. Wanted to get a bit of extra detail for this kind of a wall. So what I did was I decided to use a pattern brick layer generator within a mask, which allowed me to get a bunch of different types of bricks layered on top of the sides of the wall. And I was able to make use out of it to just also bring out some depth to it by using a height map. So I was able to kind of bump out the textures just a little bit. So this way I was able to create some nice detail to it. Additionally, I didn't quite like how they're being bumped out. I wanted to highlight the edges of those bricks. So what I did was I made use out of anchor point. I set up an anchor point as a brick alpha layer, and then using it I was able to quickly add some curvature detail to those bricks without the need of actually baking out the bricks as normal maps. So after I was happy with the way the bricks turned out and the saturation and the color of the edges of those bricks to highlight the shape, I decided to go ahead and slightly make some adjustments to the corners and edges of the entire tower. So right now I was thinking that the rings might not look as good with the brick texture. So what I did was I made sure I mask out only the sections for where the rings aren't there, so only the sides of the walls. And afterwards I wanted to add a little bit more detail, a little bit of an extra grunge on top of those bricks. Since we're making kind of a stylized look, I wanted to have just that bit of a grungy kind of a look. It's almost as if the tower is kind of a miniature version and that you get painted over with kind of a dry brush. You'd want to have a little bit more of those kind of extra details throughout it. So just getting a dry sort of a grunge map did a trick. I also made sure I get some additional variation to those bricks by having within the brick generator having some variation in there just for the height map, as well as to bring out a certain color map out for certain bricks. And I played around with the pattern itself just a little bit more, just to get a different kind of a look for this entire tower, just to break off this entire kind of a flow of a vertical tower. And I've gotten myself some thinner bricks as well as some thicker bricks in between. So I think it turned out quite alright with that. And afterwards I decided to texture out the rings as well, since they didn't need to have as much detail since they're quite small as a detail already. I went ahead and just simply added a bit of a concrete kind of a look with highlighted edges that were made using a curvature generator. So after I was happy with it, I went ahead and started to texture out the base of the asset. So I started off by using the same exact texture map, the same material that I had for the top, and I just wanted to use a masking for those rings as well. I wanted to break off a little bit of the edge flow, although I'm planning in the future for the presentation to not entirely have the base visible, just covering it up with some fog or something of the sort. I will just make sure that it is textured properly, just in case, just to make sure that we're consistent throughout with the detail of this asset. I offset some of the textures just to make sure that the bricks are aligning to the way I want them to be. I believe that I used still in the projection on the textures. I think I used that on the grunge map just to make sure that it kind of avoids the seams, leaving any seams on the tower end. The entire tower can be seen from all the angles. One way or the other, you can't exactly remove all the seams completely, but you can hide them away with certain projection techniques and whatnot. So that's what I used. Afterwards, I went ahead and started texturing process for the smaller bits of the tower. I started off texturing these kind of support beams that you see within the asset, and I tried using the same concrete texture that I had for the rings just to keep the consistent kind of a texture look, but I ended up just getting a variation off of it and just lightening up the color just to get a little bit more of a detail out of this asset. I didn't want it to make it too much out of this kind of variation. I just wanted to make it so it would break off from the rings that we have for the tower. So afterwards I went ahead and started texturing and masking out the bits for the window frames, and it was a little bit harder to do. It wasn't exactly hard, but it just took longer to do because I also wanted to have the edges of those frames to be a different kind of material instead of just bricks. So I went ahead and made sure that the bricks are actually going to be only on the sides, and for the inside of those frames of the windows are actually going to be concrete. So that way it just kind of fits in nicely with the side of the frame. So afterwards I went ahead and tried to experiment a little bit more with the steps that were connecting to the tower. I wanted to get a little bit kind of a brick looking, slab looking type of a texture for them, and I used a similar kind of method that I had for the bricks and just used the projection actually on top of those bricks in order to break them off. But in the end I didn't quite like the way they turned out, so I think I actually took them off since the detail in itself, it was a little bit too much in my opinion, so I went ahead and removed that completely. So afterwards I wanted to add some variation for the tiles of the ground, the top of the tower. So I went ahead and used I think it was called the UV chunk variation. You can make use out of it and just get some color variation within it if you overlay it on top of another texture. This way each individual slab will have a slight color variation and they will have a bit of a unique look to each one of them. I was able to do that because each one of the slabs is actually a different mesh, which was then UV unwrapped as a separate UV chunks. So it was quite easy to make variations based on that kind of result. So afterwards I went ahead and textured a bit of a pillars underneath the crystals. I quite like the default look of the concrete that we had, so I went ahead and made use of that as a base, and then I went ahead and added a bit more of a curvature kind of a highlight just to get a bit more of a highlight for the silhouette. And because there are more objects on the top, I wanted to make sure they're kind of separated visually from each other, so highlighting the edges kind of helped me to do that. So afterwards I went ahead and continuing the texturing process with the middle section of the asset, and it basically had a staircase leading up to the kind of a metal grail that was holding a gem. So I went ahead and made sure I textured that. I wanted to have a little bit more of a variation, but I wanted to keep kind of a same material look that I had for the tiles that were right next to it. So I went ahead and made sure that the color variation is being used in a similar kind of manner. So afterwards I just wanted to add some color variation independently. So what I did was I masked out some of those tiles manually, and then I went ahead and added an overlay layer in order to darken up those bits just a little bit and change the tone of this kind of texture, just to break down this entire kind of a brick wall. So after I was happy with the way it turned out, I went ahead and added a little bit more detail using ambient occlusion, grunge, as well as the curvature maps. I tried to blend them in together and make use out of them in order to break apart this entire kind of a platform for this gem. So after I was happy with the way the colors are turned out, I wanted to experiment a little bit with the brick overlay for the sides of the stairs as well. I wanted to make sure that the sides of the stairs aren't just completely plain looking, and try to kind of add a little bit of extra detail towards that area. But in the end I didn't quite like the way it turned out, so I went ahead and kept it as a kind of a concrete look to the side. So I think it turned out quite alright for that. So afterwards I was happy with it. I went ahead and started texturing the metal pieces. I already had a nice setup for a stylized metal that I was able to use, so I just placed it into my asset project, and I made use out of it to make some finer adjustments to this entire place just to fit in with the asset. I was exporting out an asset already, but I figured before doing that I wanted to add a little bit more detail. So what I had was I had a kind of pack of runes that I set up as an alpha map, and I just made use of them to kind of stomp it in within the pillars. This way I was able to get some nice detail out of this asset, out of the top section of this asset, without much of a worry. So after I was happy with the way the runes turned out, I went ahead and started texturing some of the smaller assets for this place. So I started off with the candles. And the candles had a really simplistic shape. They were basically cylinders with a little bit of an extra kind of a normal variation on the top, and the curvature map picked it up. I checked through all the generated texture maps before painting this asset just to make sure I know which types of texture maps I can make use out of, and something like curvature map and ambient occlusion, I was able to make use out of this within this area to just get some nice textures for those candles. I also added a couple of grunge maps just to kind of get more detail out of these candles, and I made sure I increased the height map just to bump out and make the wax look like it's really like it really has a lot of detail within them. So I just made sure I stamp out the top a little bit and kind of darken the areas for where the light would go onto. So once I was happy with the way the lights turned out to be, I went ahead and continued my texturing process. I wanted to add some custom detail, so what I did is I found some hand stamps by default in Adobe Substance, which I then just simply used it on the table just to stamp it out. But I didn't quite like that it would be only kind of one stamp. I didn't want to add more of those stamps, so what I did was I made a sort of a brush with a custom like blood splatters that I was able to then mask out throughout the top of the section of this tower. So I just covered out not only the table, I wanted to cover up a little bit more of that kind of blood splatter throughout this throughout the scene. So I just quickly went ahead and covered it up with a simple brush. So because the way I set it up, I had a grunge map set with a splatter kind of a texture, I was able to make use out of it and just simply stamp out the details for where I want the splatter to be. So once I was happy with the blood splatter, I went ahead and added a little bit more of a rust to those kind of metal pieces, because I figured that since we're making the top of the tower look a bit more aged with the blood, I think that the metal was looking a little bit too clean in comparison. So I went ahead and added a little bit more rust to it. So after I was happy with it, I went ahead and started texturing process for the crystals. I had a really nice setup for the crystal material, and I just basically plunked it in, but I didn't like the default color. By default they were quite blue, so I went ahead and made use out of that, but I changed the base colors just to have some variations of red, orange, and just warmish kind of colors. So after I was happy with that, I went ahead and also started creating some opacity channels, and I wanted to have the crystals a little bit transparent, but in the end I didn't quite like the way it looked. But I just made sure I have an opacity layer just in case I want to overlay it in the future. Changing up the emissive color maps as well, I figured that since we're using emissive texture map for the crystals, I'm going to add emissiveness for the runes as well, just to make it a little bit more kind of pop out for this scene. So after I was happy with it, I went ahead and quickly exported everything out. I made sure to use Unreal Engine packed, and then afterwards I'd be able to nicely set it up as a material for Unreal Engine to be used. To start up the process within Unreal Engine 5, I opened up a template, a simple blank template, and just went ahead and created a new scene, since a default one doesn't have exactly the one kind of environment that I wanted. So I went ahead and just created a new level, which gave me a better kind of a template. So once I had that opened up, I went ahead and started preparing the materials for the asset. I started by creating a master material, which basically creates a material out of PBR texture maps that we have, because we imported free texture maps. Most of the ones that we have free texture maps, the albedo, normal, and the pack texture map. We basically are able to create a material instance out of them, and then I just simply made duplicates out of those material instances and simply made sure I put the right kind of inputs for those materials to be used. And then afterwards I was thinking whether I can just simply replace them within an FBX import for the asset, but then I figured I just simply replace the reference for all the assets for the materials themselves. So the way I've done it was, once I had all the assets imported, I also made sure that I have everything imported properly with the right kind of scaling, as well as the crystal having its own animation. So once I had made sure I have everything right, I went ahead and started to actually switch out the materials, the default materials, with the ones that I set up previously. So the way I did it was by right clicking on it, you can go click asset action and then changing the reference for them by importing a different material, or in this case material asset. You can make sure to just simply make one material ticked on, and other ones that are ticked off of that list are going to be replaced by that material. So once I had made sure I'm replacing every single one of them. Oh, also I made sure that for the textures, the pack texture maps, the ones that have red, green and blue channels used as independent information, I made sure to simply tick off sRGB of the texture maps. So once I was happy with the way my texture maps turned out for the tower, I went ahead and started to plan out how this environment is going to look like. So initially I figured that I'm going to use just some massive rocks as kind of the tops of the mountains, and just have them covered, the underneath to be covered by kind of a height fog, which was super simple to do, but I figured that it's not going to look quite as well later on. But right now I'm also fixing the base of this kind of mesh, and I wanted to make sure it goes inside of the thing. So right now, because I wasn't happy with the way the silhouettes turned out for mountains, I went ahead and quickly grabbed a height map out of internet website. There is a website that you can just basically pick any kind of a area within a Google Maps and just grab a height information. And once you get that, you can use that height information as a texture to just put it into the terrain. So I was playing around with the terrain. I was trying to think maybe I could use Unreal Engine landscape and just get that, and basically you can make use out of it to just grab any kind of height information. And so I'm playing around with the values for those. I'm trying to get the kind of right results, but I'm not liking the way this is turning out actually, because even though you get the right kind of results. Oh, also by the way, if you're having a resolution for the import in Unreal Engine higher than a texture map, you're going to have the edges basically kind of blurred out on the sides. So in order to avoid that, just have the resolution map slightly lower for when you're importing the height map onto the Unreal Engine. I wanted to paint it out, the texture detail on the terrain, and I was just getting the surface materials for them to be sorted. Also, for some reason it wasn't working, the master material wasn't working quite as well for me, so I wasn't sure what was that all about. I had to fix it by replacing master material for the quicksil with basically a blank texture. So I went ahead and did that real quick. It was super simple to do. But anyway, going back to the painting materials, I kind of wasn't feeling the way it was turning out, to be honest. I was trying to paint out some detail manually by hand, but this kind of a process just doesn't quite work as well for me. If you know of a better way to make use out of a landscape texturing, please let me know. I'm aware that you can also import the vertex color maps, for example, and make use out of that, but in the end I ended up making use out of Substance Painter actually, and just getting some other results later on. But for now I'm still experimenting with those kind of values and results. Kind of didn't like the way the fog ended out to be on the default scene. So what I wanted to do was I wanted to create a sort of a cloud movement sort of a look. So I figured the best way to do it would be to use Niagara particle system for that. So I went ahead and kind of quickly made a nice material of a basic cloud that I can use, and I placed it into a material system with a particle system that you'd be able to control the color as well as the alpha through the particle system itself. And once I did that, I just plunked it into the particle renderers, the sprite renderer, and I started playing around with values. I made sure that the spawn area, the location for where the particles spawn, is going to be quite large, and then I played around with the way they move around, as well as giving them a little bit of an extra noise just to randomize some of that movement. I made sure that the movement itself is kind of makes it look like the clouds are going upwards and then slowly kind of going downwards. I made the use out of In order to get that sort of result, I made use out of gravity as well as initial velocity for this kind of a particle. So basically I'm going to come back to that and tweak it out later once I get proper mountains. But right now what I did was I just got a quick material plane. I basically plunked in the height map. I think I used Zbrush for that, but once I was happy with that, I baked out curvature, ambient occlusion texture maps, and I used the red and blue as well as green channels to just overlay the color values on top of one another. So I'd get like a kind of a packed texture map that I'd be able to make use out of within Unreal Engine. So the red, I think it was just curvature map, while the blue is ambient occlusion, and green, what I did for the green was I used the position gradient generator to kind of get some the snow later on that I'd be able to use. So this kind of a texture map I'd be able to make use out of as a sort of a alpha channel map for each one of those individual red, green and blue channels. And then after I was happy with the terrain, I plunked it into Unreal Engine, this entire mesh. So it was quite easy to do. I made sure that I scaled it up properly and positioned onto my tower, so my tower would be kind of nicely sitting right in the middle. So once I was happy with that, I just made sure I grabbed the textures that I had previously. I placed them into a new material and then basically made use out of them to kind of make use out of the height blurb in order to get a nicer blend later on. So then what I did was I made use out of that texture map that I created using Substance Painter and simply plunked it into the height blurb. That way I was able to get like some nice snow right off the bat. So after I tested it out and made sure it works, I went ahead and quickly continue making material. I added some UV variation. So basically the texture maps wouldn't be using the default UV textures of the mesh, and instead it would use a world position, so that way it would make use out of those seamless textures and loop down those textures just to get more detail out of those mountains. So later on I made use out of curvature as well as ambient occlusion just to get some extra color gradient for these mountains, just to highlight some of those details, the darkened edges as well as the corners, the curvature, you know, to make it really pop out just a little bit more for these mountains. So once I was happy with that, I just went around and played with the values just a little bit more, just to get kind of the separation, the difference and whatnot. I also made sure I play around with those kind of contrast values that we get from the height lerp node, and just to make sure that the snow blends in properly into our mountains. And afterwards I went ahead and make use out of the particles that created beforehand just to add it to the scene. I wanted to increase the amount, but obviously using too much and just overusing it would cost us some performance issues, and we don't want this to happen. So what I did was I played around with not only the particle system but with the height fog as well, just so I make sure that the bottom of the mountains are actually quite well hidden, so we couldn't see the bottom of what was happening underneath the tower. So once I was happy with it, I went ahead and played around a little bit with the post-process effects just to get a base kind of a look. I also went ahead and ended up getting kind of the sky atmosphere look that I wanted. Although this right now looks a little bit plain, by changing the atmosphere, the height of the atmosphere, you're able to get a kind of a spacey look, almost as if the mountains are right on top of the, like right in between the earth and the space. So that's quite nice, but in the end I figured it wasn't enough detail, so I went ahead and changed that later on. Right now I'm just getting a couple of shots the way I want to present my work, and I want to have a little bit of an aerial shot as well as a couple of close-ups. So I was working with that. I got myself kind of a focal point from an object. I attached the camera to an object, and with that I was able to just rotate an entire camera based on that asset. By doing that, I'm able to just switch around getting a couple of cameras and just getting multiple shots of different locations for this asset. This way I'm able to get some really nice cinematic shots, so exactly the way I want them to be. Next step, I wanted to go ahead and make use out of a level sequencer to just create some shots that basically overlap with one another. I'll be able to use that in post-process in Premiere, just make some cuts in between them. Right now I'm just making sure that I'm using rotation. For some of the shots I made sure that the motion is set to linear, that way for example like a turntable, it'd be able to have a constant motion without any type of a slowing down or anything of the sort. During this process I was also able to get some nice close-up shots, and I was also able to pick certain values for the color as well as some bloom effects and just indirect kind of light bounces, just to avoid those kind of hard edge shadows. Afterwards I figured I need to add a little bit of kind of lighting to those crystals just to light up those top sections of the pillars, as well as that kind of a grail that we have in the middle section of this asset. And after I was happy with lighting it up, I didn't quite like the way the skybox was set out, so what I did was I had a nice kind of a galaxy look set up, and I had a mesh that goes with it. Basically I plunked down one with another. I made sure that the material is set to unlit, otherwise it would be affecting this entire kind of a sphere. I then made sure I zoom out all the way to the background so it wouldn't be affecting the scene entirely. And while doing this, I figured I'd also add a light map importance, so just in case that kind of a sphere wouldn't be picked up by light baking processes or anything of the sort. So after I was happy with the way it turned out, I went ahead and played a little bit more with the fog. I made sure I'm getting a nice kind of result, and after I was happy with it, I went ahead and texture for a planet. I wanted to have a nice kind of a planet in the background, since otherwise it looked a little bit empty for the scene. So what I did was I made a quick cutout with a Photoshop software, and I went ahead and just plunked it all the way in the background just like that. So just by mashing them up together, I was able to get a much nicer kind of a look for the background. So after I was happy with it, saved out my project, I enabled a plugin for the making a couple of extra adjustments in the post-process effects. I went ahead and got myself a bit of a kind of sharper image with some more vibrant colors. And once I was happy with the result, I went ahead and made the renders the way I want them to be. Just made sure I check out the entire kind of a scene. I changed a little bit of a location for the mountains, just got a bit of a kind of a nicer look. Got a couple of screenshots just to check how they look in Photoshop, for example, and played around a little bit more with the values in post-process effect. Then I kind of realized that some edges are visible for this terrain, so I went ahead and used modeling mode to just kind of hide them away and kind of smoothing out those edges. After playing around with the post-process effects, I kind of realized that the skybox is not looking quite as nice, so I went ahead and tried to fix it. I realized that at the moment I was using a cheap contrast which doesn't support RGB values, so in order to get the color back outside of the skybox, I had to go ahead and make use out of the RGB contrast node that was a little bit different to the one I had previously. And then afterwards I realized that I kind of want to have a little bit of some flickering for the kind of stars that I have, and I tried to use an entire skybox for that, but I realized that it's a little bit too much when it comes to flickering for entire galaxies, so I didn't quite like that. So what I did afterwards was I just simply added another kind of an overlay for the stars separately, and I made them kind of slightly twinkle a little bit just to get that kind of a effect of a live kind of a space. So afterwards I also added a bit of a sun, as well as I played around with the default atmosphere which was already set up for the Unreal Engine. So what I did was I actually lowered down the entire atmosphere down a little bit, because what I realized was that the darkness that I get out of it kind of ruins a little bit of the scene, and it actually covers the slight bottom of the tower. So I went ahead and kind of dragged it down just a little bit, just to get that kind of a transitional gradient of a blue tint that you'd get from an atmosphere. So by using that, I just got a kind of a nice kind of a tint out of it, and then I realized that I kind of want to add a bit of a sun look to the sky. So what I did was I added some panning for textures, just overlapped them one with one another, and I added a sun way back off in the distance. So this way it's going to look like there is a sun in the background, and I quite like the way it turned out. And that's going to be it, guys. I really hope you enjoyed the video of this stylized tower scene. Please give us a like if you did, and drop a comment down below of what you would like to see next. Also, check out the links down in the description below to see our massive library of courses available, which are free to any of the ones that sign up for the Patreon. Next scene is being made at the moment. We are creating an underwater pool scene with some bit of a twist added to it, so you definitely wouldn't want to miss that one. And that'll be all. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.